The integrated bracelet craze has both pulled and pushed people away from and towards sports watches. I'll admit that's not my best ever opening line, but we're going to roll with it. So I'll admit, this is the only line that I've written for this video, nothing else. And that alone was a good starting point, a place to begin from. We are so quick to jump on and talk about the watches that frequent this platform: AP Royal Oaks, Patek Philippe Nautiluses, Vacheron Constantin Overseas. Girard-Perregaux, the Laureato, on the other hand, you barely hear a whisper about this watch. It is highly underrated. Now, why do I say that? Well, I've had experience with all of these pieces. I've experienced the AP Royal Oak, modern and vintage, many different sizes, different metals. I've experienced the Patek Philippe Nautilus, also precious metals, the Vacheron Overseas, being able to experience the Generation 3. And on top of that, the Laureato 39 with the blue dial and the Panda dial chronograph. Now, many on this platform and in other places have basically pigeonholed this watch into a category where it is considered a Gerald Genta clone. But it isn't. It's far from it. In fact, it brings something to the table that the others don't. And that's really why I want to talk about them today. They are highly underrated, and their designs eliminate the fluff that many other brands seem to relish in. So let's unpack them a bit more. First thing to do is to start with a common misnomer that this watch was brought out among the heap of other watches at the same time. It was in fact one of the earliest adopters of the integrated case and bracelet. 1972, I believe, the AP Royal Oak was introduced, and this was brought out in 1975. The Laureato was designed by an Italian architect by the name of Adolfo Natalini, and the name Laureato literally means graduate. So with a name like that, immediately you could say that this watch did not try to pull its inspirations from nautical themes. Of this time, 1975, with a name like Graduate, does give you a different image and perspective around the design and the style and the kind of audience that this watch was marketed towards. Now, we should bear in mind, along with so many other watches that came out at this time, like the Tissot PRX, another model that's just been reinvigorated, this watch was introduced with a quartz movement, which was a practical thought at the time because quartz was accessible, it was the style of the time, it was considered to be the future of watchmaking because, well, you could not get accuracy like this anywhere else. So it needs to be said that even in the early days when this design was first implemented and used, this was one of the early watches to adopt this formula. And really the rest of its story is history. By 2016 we saw a reinvigoration of the Laureato, and so we see it now today competing against the likes of the Patek Nautilus and the many other names. We fast forward, we arrive at a time now where the integrated sports watch craze is everywhere. So it begs the question, being one of the early adopters, being one of the first watches to do this, why was it never seen as significant as the many other big names and big players in this industry? I think the answer is twofold, especially now. First off, the integrated sports watch market is saturated. Any price point you can think of, you can pretty much get a watch with a design of this type, which is unfortunate because it sadly dilutes the potency and the strength of such a great and unique design. And the second main component, I think, is just because so many collectors today are after investment potential, putting their money into something, and the GP Laureato has never been seen as a watch to get that kind of reception. You know, when the wider collecting community has this expression saying that it's a Genta clone, saying that it's a design that's just trying to profit off an original idea, that sort of reputation sticks, even though it is pretty unfounded considering the sheer variety of watches that all copy the same design. If we observe the Laureato collection purely from a design point of view, it's not a watch that stands out next to its contemporaries. It doesn't necessarily have key defining features that have made it so prominent and different. We think of the porthole design, we think of the screws in the bezel, we think of the shoulders of the Nautilus. We think of the vibrant and dynamic bezel of the Vacheron 222 and its further evolution of the Overseas. The Laureato, as a contrast, presents itself as something quite plain, something pretty unoffensive as a design. Like so many other integrated bracelet models, it's a design that you will either love or hate. But what I have really admired about this watch, not only seeing it in the flesh, but seeing these as presented images, is that it's a watch that tries not to show off. It actually stays extremely understated. It's not a watch that shouts about its presence, it's not one that showboats. The brushing and polishing throughout is so minimal that it's barely reflective at all. Some would even use the word boring. Why a design, a style, aesthetic like this speaks to me so much today is because it's not recognizable. It's the complete opposite of what we have been seeing on so many wrists. And maybe its uniqueness comes from the fact that it is not trying to outdo the others. It's not trying to be special. Its design is not stylized, it is efficient, and that can be best summed up when you look to the bracelets, its level of simplicity, the use of brushing and polishing, as well as when we look at the bezel, probably the best example. So many of these watches incorporate an octagonal bezel to simulate a porthole design. That celebrates the theme and the watch's inspiration. In this instance, the octagonal shape is not only there for a style purpose, but it's also functional. The bezel fits on as a separate piece. It needs to be unscrewed and removed from the case if the movement needs to be worked on. Purely from an industrial design point of view, this is celebrating the mechanics in the simplest way possible. It's making the functional aspect also a design feature. I think a great way to sum up the style of this watch is when we look to the pencil hands and the sharp stick batons. They evoke this sense of academia, further emphasizing this graduate name, which I really like. We look to the dial of these watches. Instead of using a tapisserie pattern, which is quite common and cliched, this watch decides to go more along the lines of an old school hand-engraved checkering pattern. The three-dimensionality and the sharpness of these patterns gives you more of a tactile feel. But to further expand this collection, and what makes it so fascinating as a whole, is the sheer variety that is on offer. Every kind of metal you can think of, including titanium, rose gold, yellow gold. Sizes ranging from 39mm up to 42mm, and a huge range of complications. You even see some of the most special models implement sapphire cases, ceramic cases and bracelets. And its complications, everything from time and date to chronograph functions, even to a skeletonized arrangement. It needs to be said that the skeletonized dials, they are in a league of their own, and given all the options, I think this would be the configuration I would go after if money was no object. The simplicity of the case, the bracelets, the bezel, allows for Girard-Perregaux to pay a lot more attention to the dial, and this is clearly on show. There is more of a laser focus on the dial's finishing techniques, what types of elements will be applied, and what colors will be chosen. The underratedness of this watch, of this collection, comes from the fact that it is undervalued by the majority. And because of that, there is huge opportunity for us as enthusiasts, as collectors, to look into this brand. For me, it's the simplicity. It's the idea that these watches are not eye-catching, that you could wear them very easily every single day. The surfaces do not alert attention, but this package is also extremely capable of fulfilling the formal occasions so well. Some great advice about this watch collecting hobby of ours is that when everyone's attention is in one place, you look elsewhere, and you might be surprised at what you find. These Laureatos present themselves as something engineered, something functional but also casual, far more casual than the many others on offer. And within this design range, there are so many options to choose from different materials to complications. It's an integrated bracelet watch that probably would not garner a second look if you wore it every day. Naturally, we are dealing with high horology, the movement is beautifully decorated, it's on display. Every single bridge is highly polished and well finished. Care and attention was put into all of the details throughout. Honestly, this is one of the stealthiest integrated bracelet watches you can get today. And basically, it says you're wearing a 70s inspired watch without shouting about its name or its brand. And in our watch world today, where 8 screws on a bezel separates you from the next individual, maybe the simpler design is the better choice.